vertically, as you know, 2 weeks on cylinders, 2 weeks on mugs, 2 weeks on pitchers. We're now going to sort of move horizontally. However, bowls can be more upright or they can be more open depending on the function of it. Okay, so there's all different kinds of functions. So for the bowl critique, we'll go around and you'll tell us what the function is for each bowl. For instance, who has ever tried to make a cake mix out of a bowl like in a bowl like this? You virtually can't do it. The ingredients go flying everywhere. For mixing type bowls, you'd want a more upright form to, enclose the ingredients. This would be more suitable for what?
Spaghetti.
Bread.
Yeah.
Or
fruit.
Fruit.
Spaghetti.
Mm-hmm.
Spaghetti.
Spaghetti. Perfect spaghetti bowl.
So.
Right? Some people have spaghetti on plates, but plates might be too flat. Then you get into a fine line between, you might see it in the books called instructions on how to make a low bowl, flat platter, or low bowl. So, if the platter is really flat, or you curve the sides up a little bit, then it's a low bowl, fine line. But yeah, it's really good for pasta, right? Soup, if it's too flat, it's going to splash out. So there's all kinds of functions for a bowl. More, with finer details, we can articulate finer functions than perhaps with mugs or pitchers that are pretty standard for drinking and pouring out of. Some are purely decorative. It might just be a little candy dish for a coffee table. Something like this with a non-functional surface is obviously purely decorative. So what I'm going to do today is start throwing a more upright mixing bowl type form.
How many pounds is that?
I think it was 7.5 pounds. This is our Valentine throw, right? There's a lot of waste because what we're going to do when it's leather hard is we're going to flip it upside down, recenter it on the wheel, and carve out a foot. A bowl has to have a foot. That's part of the etiquette, part of the bowl protocol.
So do you not put a shadow line?
We will then roll another shadow line on the foot. Oh yeah, you don't have to worry about those. So, this would not be appropriate. Right, that's a planter. You have to have a visible foot. So this person thought they were carving a foot, but it's not visible from the outside. So what's nice about it is it sort of puts it on a pedestal. It sets the piece up on a pedestal. Right? Say yes.
Yes.
Okay. I can get my right arm anchored on my leg. My left arm is flapping in the air. Down and in. I found this piece in your barrel and it was already seemingly wedged. See how wedged it really is. I didn't touch it. It's pretty stiff too. So again, my right arm's anchored, my left arm I'm not able to anchor anywhere. Notice how steady my hands are. Okay. Still pushing down and then in. Keeping my hands steady. So this top part is centered, but that's because my hands are only coming in contact with this top part. You can see how the bottom is still not centered. So I will cone that again. Now both arms are anchored on my thighs as I squeeze this stiff mound of clay up. Again, by keeping the back clean, you know where to start this part of your hand, right at the bottom, so that you can get all of the clay without having it spread out all over the bat. Squeeze it up into a column. Notice my hands are not moving, this is moving. You have to figure out how to stop those hands. I really can't do that for you. So scoot your stool till it hits the wheel. Get up close and personal. Stop your hands like this. The clay will spin itself in your hands. Whatever they're doing. If they're doing this, then the clay's going to do that. If you go in and show who's boss, it will behave itself. Okay. Down and in. Okay, so now I'm going to give it the big hockey puck shape, down and in. My left hand's pushing down, even though it's situated differently the larger the lump of clay. Just because you've got to try to cover as much of the clay as you can, but it's still pushing down, in, or down and in. Okay, you know, it doesn't matter what size it is, you're still applying those two pressures. Questions? Big old air bubble here. It's zoomed in all the way though, right? Yeah. Any questions to this point? All right, so you have to have in mind, you know, are you going to do a very low platter bowl? If I were going to do a real low open bowl, I might center this really flat. If I'm going to do more of an upright mixing bowl, then I'm not going to center it as flat. So you do have to have in mind what kind of bowl you're making. Okay.
So we can't just shape it like we did pictures?
You will, but you know, there's a difference between maybe something like this and something like this. I mean, the amount of clay you're using at this point probably won't make that much of a difference. If, you know, if I were making a 10-pound platter versus a 10-pound mixing bowl, I would center, this clay would be centered differently. So if I were making a 10-pound mixing bowl, I'd probably center it like this. If I were making a 10-pound platter, I would flatten it even more. Okay. Okay. So we've been talking about when we open up, we go this far from the bat, right? Less than 1/4 of an inch. Now we can't go down that far because we're going to carve out a foot, right? And the foot, bottom of the foot's going to sit on this shelf, whether it's a table or the kiln shelf. And we're going to carve out a circle in the interior of the foot And we want to have it deep enough so that it does not touch the bottom of the kiln shelf. We can glaze that inner circle. So therefore, we don't want to go down as far. Plus, if you want a tall foot. Now give these a healthy foot. There's nothing worse than a real wimpy foot on a bowl. Give it a good, healthy foot. So you're not going to go down as far, but because you're not going to go down as far, that means you're going to have to compress it even more. You know how we compress it? Why do we compress the clay at the bottom? So it doesn't do what?
That's correct.
Doesn't crack. Excuse me. When you have more clay, you have more clay to compress. If you don't compress it, this is the kind of S-crack you're getting. It's very tiny. Pass that around. It's very tiny, but nevertheless you can't sell it because it's cracked. It's got, bacteria is going to go in that little split there. So you could not sell it. You wouldn't want to use it for sanitary purposes. So you have to, the more clay that's there, the more you have to compress it. Okay? All right. So, again, find your little center before you drill down. I have this little ring here that's occurring. I'm going to want to compress this right down now so that I don't lose it later. Okay. Did you hear that air bubble? Mm-hmm. Wow. Like I said, I just took somebody's clay out of the barrel. It looked like it had been wedged, but whew, not much. That's what I get for not wedging it myself. All right, so let me show you how thick the bottom is. It's that thick. Now you might think that's thick, but so if this is the bottom, you know, the thickness from my nail to the needle is the thickness of the clay, then this represents just the height of the foot. That's about it. I don't want to go down really much farther than that. Okay? You can bring that, pass that bowl back over here. You don't have to hold it. So therefore, let me compress this lip again. That is where one of the air bubbles was.
I don't want to walk over there.
Is that in anybody's way? It's hard for me to tell. Okay, so I now have a lot to compress because it's that much thicker now versus what it was before. And before you're pressing against the bat, so the bat adds some counter pressure, right? Now all I'm pushing against is, this is like riddled with air bubbles. Well, I learned my lesson, didn't I? Okay. I'm gonna mess up your demo. Okay. Pop, snap, pop. It's like a bowl of Rice Krispies. Snap, crackle, pop. Okay, but what I'm doing now, while I'm compressing this, what have we been doing with cylinders, mugs, and pitchers? We've been compressing the floor, pulling our fingers back into a 90-degree angle in the corner, right? For 6 weeks we've been harping on that. Now that we're working on bowls, we've already talked about recurves. how there should be no highs and lows. I've been compressing, but it's in this smooth curve. So that if you close your eyes and run your fingers from the center of the bowl up the sides, you just feel this one continuous curve. Okay? We do not any longer want that 9-degree angle in the corner. Okay, so lots of problems with this bowl. That's why it's still here, but that's why we like it. It's full of problems. Number one, it would suffice quite well as a doorstop. Number two, you cannot see the foot. Okay, so you must see a visibly carved foot. Number two, when you look inside, what do you see?
A recurve.
You see that recurve, you see that flat bottom and then the sides come up. That's a no-no. And that might be hard for you to break because you've been working on it for so long. Sometimes you can't see recurves, but sometimes it's visible. When it's visible, it's really bad. But it should be just a smooth transition. So if you were to take your fingers, run them from the center of the bowl across the floor and up the walls, it should not get caught anywhere. It should be a smooth transition. Okay? Now, this is a little different because this line obviously was deliberately put in as decoration. So there's no recurve. You run your fingers from here up. Obviously they halt right here, but that's a deliberate line made with my tool. Then it does change direction and flare out, but then that should be a smooth transition from that line out, excluding the carvings, which is also deliberate, obviously. So that's the deal. But there's a heck of a lot more clay here than when we were working on mugs, cylinders, pitchers, and it was a very thin floor and we were pushing against the bat. Now we're just pushing against a mound of soft, mushy clay, and if you're not careful, you'll get that little S-crack. Okay? All right, so how do we retain that curve? You can imagine what we've been doing for 6 weeks. We pull up the walls, pull up the walls, pull up the walls, pull up the walls. Well, what do you think is going to happen on the inside every time we start our fingers there? You're going to make a big indent. So how do we not do that? Every time we start, we start the inner hand at the center of the circle. We start there, we come across the floor, feeling that curve, feeling that transition. When we're opposite our outside hands, that's when we come up together. But meanwhile, you've traced that curve. Does that make sense? Starting in the center, I'm coming across that floor. When I feel myself across from the outside fingers, they come up together. But meanwhile, I've traced that silhouette of the inner bowl. Let me show you. So that I've retained that curve. I can't start here and pull up. I will get a huge indentation. So you always start in the center. First pull is always the hardest. And usually I don't make the wedge till the second pull. Again, start your fingers in the center. You're welcome to get up and move around if you can't see. So I am still basically working on a cylinder. I've got to get these walls to go up first, or I will never be able to thin them. If I immediately start trying to throw a bowl, the walls will be so thick. And you trim a foot, you don't trim the whole thing. You're only trimming like the bottom third of the bowl. You don't trim the whole thing. But if I start making a bowl right from the beginning, without thinning the walls and still so basically working on a cylindrical form. Each time, however, if it dries out in the inside, just take your little sponge, just run a little film of water up the inside. Start, again, fingers on the inside, you're coming across the floor, you're feeling the silhouette. Then they meet your outside fingers, and you come up the wall. Look at my thumbs are locked. Come up the wall together. Let go slowly at the rim. I would compress the rim. Make your wedge. So all of that is similar to what you've been doing. Okay. You see, Anna? And that's what you do. Now, other things about the different types of bowls. If it's just a very graceful, thin, porcelain type bowl that's sitting on a coffee table, it could have a very thin rim. Very thin rim like this. If it's a mixing bowl, and you know you've got your wooden utensils in there and you're clanging them around and it's in and out of the sink and in and out of the dishwasher, you might want a more reinforced, fatter, rounder lip. I love fat, round lips anyway, but it's just stronger and more utilitarian for the kitchen use. So, you know, one thing about thinking about the different uses of these bowls can help you give your bowls character too. You know, if it is a certain type of bowl, then you're going to give it a certain character. So that might really help you with ideas, some of you who are thinking, oh, I don't know what shape to make. Starting in the center. My inner thumb comes out when it can to lock with the outer thumb to keep my hands steady. So again, I'm thinning the walls till I think they're thin enough, and then I can start giving it some final shaping. So there's a lot of extra clay here that's going to get trimmed away later into the foot. So you might think oh gee, you started with a big lump of clay and this is all I got. That's, you know, a little disheartening. Again, you can run a thin film of water down the inside. If your hand keeps drying out, don't keep a puddle of water in there though. I'm starting in the center, coming across the floor. So a nice high-sided deep bowl would be perfect. Something like this is a good mixing bowl type form, right?
Keep going.
Hmm?
I don't want to get into this if you're.
Oh. Okay. Now, I think the walls are thin enough that, whoopsie, holding it on its side sort of knocked it over. Now I think the walls are thin enough I can start giving this mixing bowl some shape, some final, you know, if I want to bow it out a little bit more at the bottom, if I want to flare out the lip ever so slightly, I do my little line designs, trim and fatten the lip and everything. Um, the other thing I would want to do that we saw here, we see a lot of the finger ridges in there, right? Obviously, from the throwing rings from our finger ridges. If this were a mixing bowl, do you think you'd want those finger ridges in there? Good cooks, see? We're always thinking about cooking and the proper utensils, right? And after all, that's how pottery began. Probably the first functional vessel ever made, ever accidentally fired, was a bowl, right? A clay-lined basket. And that's probably the first utilitarian object ever made. So maybe that's why I love bowls so much. They have a great history, but you can make them decorative or functional. Okay, so again, as we discussed before, there's a variety of different bowls. My challenge always seems to be getting the right rib to fit the shape of the bowl. But you definitely do not want finger ridges if this is going to be a utilitarian bowl. So then the challenge is, I've refrained from putting in any recurves so far, but now you're going to run the rib on the inside. The rib is going to be in lieu of your fingers. Remember, wherever there's a rib, your fingers are opposite it, right? But the problem is the rib is feeling the bowl now. You are no longer feeling the bowl. So it's hard for you to see or feel it when the silhouette goes high or low and starts to create those recurves. You can wet your fingers, start in the center, come across the floor, and come up. Oops. Oh, and really try not to gouge your lip like that. Wow. Kind to your bowl, huh? Bring that puppy back on center after we just took a chunk out of it. All right, so to save time, I'm going to show you how to turn this into a more wide open form. Okay, right now we sort of have what you would call a good functional mixing bowl. Not too attractive. I would shape it and give it a little more character at this point. But what if we wanted to make a more open form? We still have to sort of go through this process. Why again? Why would we have to go through this even if we're making an open form?
Thin walls. Make the walls thinner.
To thin the walls, exactly. And you have to go vertical to thin the walls. Okay? So, if we wanted to open it up though more, I'm always compressing the lip. You probably learned from your pictures if you didn't compress the lip and when you went to stretch that spout, it probably split on you. Same with the bowl. I'm going to stretch this lip out, so I want to make sure it's compressed. All right, I'm starting in the center. I want this to be, I'm going to turn this now into a more open, like serving salad bowl. Now see the outside, there's some wet spots and dry spots on the outside, so my hand keeps dragging. Without getting it too wet, you might want to run a film of water up there just to make it consistent. You certainly don't want to have any more water than you would need. Okay, so now it's opening up some more. Next pull. Start in the center, across the floor, up the wall, and now I'm gradually pushing out a little bit Wherever my inside hands are doing the pushing though, my outside hands are just there, or outside fingers. They're there for reinforcement, for support, for counter pressure. A little bit more each time. You're slowly stretching it out. You can't do it too fast. If I compress this lip. Okay, starting in the center. Now I'm putting finger ridges back in again after I had taken them out, as if for being a mixing bowl. So you shape gradually. And again, you can feel free to get up. It's getting wider and wider and opening it up wider. Now, if you haven't thinned the walls at this point, you know, you can't thin the walls once it starts going horizontal like this.
And you're still pulling out from the center when you're doing all this?
Yeah, I'm always starting, I mean, again, if you want to get up and look, always starting my fingers in the center so that I can feel the transition of the wall. I come across the floor and I feel it coming across, and if I feel any high points, I might push down a little. If I feel any low points, I might ease up a little. And then when I am across the wall from my outside fingers, they come up together. But that prevents that recurve at the bottom. Okay. So my right arm is anchored on my thigh, my left arm is anchored in my rib cage.
How much do we have to shape these?
What do you mean?
Like, do we have to give them like a lot of waves and things like, cause like our pictures all had to be different. Like, can some of our bowls be similar?
No.
No. Okay. Well, the bowls, I don't know.
Well, think about a different function for each bowl. They're bowls. This is when you can get creative. Absolutely. You know, a popcorn bowl versus a personal chili bowl versus a serving bowl. So this is when you can have a variety. You know, I would think this would help you get a more variety of shape than, say, some of the other forms we've been making. Okay, so before it gets too flat on me, I'm going to bring the rib back in, because now with all this pushing out, all the finger marks that I took out before, when it was going to remain a mixing bowl, have all come back in again because I continued to throw it flat. Well, not flat. So all of this represents the finger ridges. You can wet your fingers, start in the center, and you can feel air bubbles. Wow. I won't do that again, will I? Okay, so again, can't get all the finger ridges out in one pull. But this is where you can really put some finger ridges, you can really throw some recurves in if you're not careful with the rib. Because you're no longer feeling the wall. The rib is touching the wall. You can't feel it anymore. And then suddenly you've got a recurve when you didn't have one before. All right, so I want to bend this lip out some more, and this is where you could definitely lose the bowl. And I have before in demos. You want to push it to see how far you can go. Yeah, if you're just going to have a fruit bowl, say, with oranges and apples and bananas, it can be pretty much open, couldn't it? Be a real open form. This is when you really want to throw dry. As little water as possible. You don't want to dry out mid-pull. That's annoying, but as dry as possible. And these ribs, they're not only shaping, but they're scraping some of that really wet, slippy stuff off. Which helps dry it up too. I hope that yawn isn't audible on this video. They'll
I'm
think
quiet.
it's boring.
Yeah.
Now you see how I'm barely touching it. You know, sometimes I let it set up a little bit.
What do you mean set up that dry out a little bit?
Yeah, if I want to bend that lip, that rim out even flatter. I mean, if I keep going, it's gonna collapse and flatten out. So sometimes what you can do is just, you know, let it set up a little bit, come back, flatten it some more. Here it is. Looking for my trusty line maker. So of course I have to put a line in it. If you wanted to use the white slip, you could do that. Trimming, you could do it come from underneath. Bring the needle in till it hits your finger, waiting for it. One full revolution. Stop the wheel. Pull that off. Now I definitely want to refine this lip and bend it out a little bit more. So I won't cut it yet. I never knew what that little thing there was till I realized you can come in and that helps bevel the edges of a lip. How is the chamois working on the end of a cork? Floats in your water bucket? So this will start, as it dries, the rim will start to pull in a little bit. So that's why I'm not going to cut it off yet. Maybe at the end of class I might put it back on the wheel, bend this lip out a little bit more, and make sure it's as flat as I want it. So what happened once I was doing that in my studio and it collapsed? And I'm sitting there like this holding it, and of course I don't have all these friends around like you guys do, looking around going, who's gonna help me? The cat's gonna help me? No, they're worthless. And I ended up finding things in my studio that I could prop up under this bowl that had collapsed. And long story short, I ended up with something like this that turned out to be one of my favorite bowls. An accident turned into a, so that, that's what I say, don't ever trash something without having your way with it, figure out something, you think it's collapsed, it's shot. I mean, this literally was collapsed. Well, actually what I did, I think, so, where are a bunch of bats when you need one, huh?
It's all clean.
They're all cleaned. I think you owe us, Katie, we just cleaned all your bats.
You did?
Why? Well, because I got sick of looking at stacks of dirty bats. The thing had collapsed, so I took a couple stools. Jeez, there's no stools either. You have nothing to lose, right? So the bowl is flat on your bat, and I took it and I flipped it and let it hang upside down for a while too. That's another way to sort of make a nice wave.
And it didn't fall off?
No, because I hadn't cut it. You don't cut it, it's not going anywhere.
That's crazy.
That's not what happens to mine. We rip off all the
I know.
parts.
I would rip right
Yeah.
No.
Sweet.
All right. So then, day 2. Your bowl has to become leather hard. So that you can flip it upside down and trim it. Trim a foot. Okay? Now when you have a big bowl like this, the rim dries really fast. Why?
Thinner.
Because it's really thin, and then you've got all this extra thick clay that's not drying very fast down on the bottom. So as soon as you feel like the top half that's really dry, you can flip it, but then you have to cover that. So let's see, I threw this Tuesday, covered it up when I left, came in Wednesday, and it was all ready. Even though it was under plastic, the top half was dry. I was able to flip it right then and there. But then I had to cover that now bottom half with plastic to keep that from drying anymore. I didn't want it to dry anymore, exposing this part and letting this dry up. And then, of course, again, when I left last night, I had to cover it up completely. And it's ready to go. So we do have a few bigger bats here for bigger pieces. Don't do me any favors today, Bowl. Okay. All right. Well, we wanted to do that anyway. Okay. So you pick up the bowl, now that's leather hard, ready to be trimmed. So leather hard, sort of like when your mugs and pitchers were ready for handles. No, not if they're still stuck to a bat. Okay. Then you rest this puppy on your knee, and you talk to it a little bit, stroke it. Hand on the inside, hand on the outside. Come down the wall and try to feel where it starts to thicken up. Where does it start to thicken up? Right here. Make a mark with your thumb. Okay. Also try to get a sense of what it looks like on the inside. Is it sort of flattish on the inside, or does it come to a cone shape? Because the other issue that occurs is a bowl will look like one type of form on the inside, and then the person doesn't carve enough away on the outside, and the outside looks like a totally different bowl. They look like two different bowls, which means you didn't carve enough away. So you sort of have to sort of remember what it looks like on the inside. Okay? Okay, then a sense of how much, I think it's really thin in the middle, but I have a lot of chunky clay here on the sides. So, can you carve through it? Oh, yes you can.
Okay, if you tell us it's on center.
I'm going to tell you now. Now you got to recenter it. This just double the fun. You get to center this puppy twice. So guess what? It better be centered to begin with, or this is going to be difficult. How do we center it? Well, first of all, you can make a little, you can help yourself out by making a wet circle on the bat, but I know I sort of placed it pretty evenly. All right. This is when these needles that I don't like for trimming lips, because they're too fat for trimming lips, but these are good for centering because they're not flexible. So here's what you're going to do. You think you're going to keep your body steady, or you're going to be moving all around?
Steady.
Yes. Steady. Grab one of these needles. Where's my thumb mark? Uh-oh. I got a bunch of thumb marks.
It's right there.
That? All right, so right here. I'm going to hold this needle as steady as I can. Look at my elbows, anchored in my rib cage. Look at me grabbing this needle with both index fingers. My hands are like in love on Valentine's Day here. Come in slowly, as if you were going to trim a lip, right? Until it starts to hit the piece. Do not move the needle. Do not move it. Keep it stationary. Stop the wheel. Where is the mark? The scratch mark goes from here to here. That means it's too far in that direction where the scratch mark is. So I need to move it in the opposite direction where there isn't a scratch mark. Tell me if that doesn't make sense. So here's, again, stand up. You can come closer if you need to. Here's my two scratch marks. All this is where there is no scratch mark, so I'm going to gently move it in that direction. Not a lot, because then you can move it too much in the other direction. Come back again. See if you did any better. My needle is dead on steady. Okay, so now the scratch mark, it extended about another inch that way and several inches this way. So now it's too far that way.
When you say it's like a little bit more?
It went a little more, yep. But I still have to pull it in the same direction towards where there is no scratch mark. Does that make sense?
You're pulling.
Yeah, I'm pulling the bowl towards me. I'm moving it towards me.
The whole thing?
Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah. It's probably so slight you didn't see it, but if I move it too much, then I might overcompensate. So what I'm looking for is an even scratch around the whole bowl. Because if this is stationary, then that means it's centered. And I could tell it was gonna be centered, yep. See this? Even scratch all the way around the bowl now. Okay, so the bad news is, if this is off-center to begin with. All right, so you want to make like 3 fat coils. And oh, well, the other important thing is, besides having the bowl be on center, is you don't want this to be too dry, but you don't want it to be too soft either. Okay? Okay, so evenly distribute the 3 coils and then just gently smush them down, because you don't want to move your bowl just by pushing down on these coils. This is not going to probably go anywhere because this is so big and heavy. But if you have a tiny little bowl, you might move it while you're trying to put these on. So first you go around and slowly, gently push these coils in, and then a little harder, a little harder, a little harder, a little harder.
How are you gonna get them off?
They peel right off.
Oh, really?
Because this is soft, this is leather hard, so it's sort of not sticking. Alright, so this is when you need those 2 trimming tools that came in your kit. Okay? The R1 and the R2. Okay, so if you haven't gotten your tools yet, you need them now. Although I've got a big bowl here, so I need a bigger trimming tool. These are never sharp enough. That's why I like the R1 and the R2. They're sharp, but they're really small. Well, let's see what this does. Alright, make sure this is on there. You think you have to keep the tools steady?
Yeah.
Now, if you spread newspaper on the floor, you don't know what else is on the floor, so you don't usually want to just pick stuff up off the floor. But if I were in my studio at home, I would put newspaper on the floor so that I could just take the newspaper and dump all the scraps on the reclaim table, and then I would be reusing all this clay. I mean, why not? Why not? You know, you're paying for it, why not reuse it? But if it falls on the floor, I mean, around here, you don't know what else is on the floor. I sort of know what's on my floor at home. A lot of cat hair. Now, if I were at home and I had my back to that bowl, my cat would already be inside of it.
Really?
Oh. In 1 second. You take your eye off it for 1 second and she'd be in it.
Just sitting in there?
Yeah.
Cats are so weird.
They're just, you know, she has to be.
Just like it.
She's gotta be, she's a cat.
Is she wrecked any of your bowls?
Walk on the rim. Oh, look what Mom made. I like this. Mm-hmm. It smells like her, so I'm gonna sit right on it. And then she looks at you with her big eyes like this. She's real tiny, and it's like, how can you smash her?
Just hold up the bowl.
How can you hurt her?
Cat
It's a cat.
She has survived on her looks. If she wasn't so cute, sometimes she loses studio privileges and gets tossed out.
Tossed it.
And then her brother has to go lumbering after her, who's 6 times her size. All right. We digress with cat stories.
It's on the video too.
What?
It's on the video too.
I mean, you know, Potters have cats in the studios, and
What about dogs?
they're good cooks because we're always thinking about cooking utensils. Okay, so we talk about all the things that could go wrong. I'm just trying to save you here, trying to tell you everything. Not trying to be Debbie Downer, just trying to tell you everything that can go wrong. Can you carve through this wall?
Yes.
Yes, you can. So if the cat didn't sit on the bowl, I would carve through it, so. So, how do we not carve through the bowl? I'm gonna give you a couple of tricks. Okay, you should do this before you start. So before you start, put your ear down to it when it's all thick and tap on it. In your ear. Spend a little time with your bowl.
Hello, bowl.
And when you tap on it and it's thick, it sort of sounds like a dull thud. And then as it gets thinner and thinner and thinner, it's going to sound more hollow and more hollow, sort of like a taut drum. You know how a drum sounds? When you tap on it, you're going to hear that sound start to come out. That means you're getting thinner and thinner. The other thing you can do is what I do all the time is I push on it. Push gently first. Okay, gently, it's not moving. Press harder, 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 harder. Still no movement. That means I must have some clay there still to carve away. That does not work if you waited too long and this is just so hard. That's why it's not moving. It's never going to move because it's so hard. But I know that, you know, this is a pretty good. It's not too hard, it's not too soft, so my push test I know could be pretty accurate.
When you're carving like that, are you pushing down or are you just kind of holding it and letting the spin
You know,
do
that's
the
an
work?
excellent question because I just caught myself doing what you shouldn't do. I have a tendency to lay it flat against the bowl and it doesn't cut as much. You want to come in at an angle. So if this were like a 90-degree angle, try to come in with like a 45-degree angle with this tool so that you're actually carving the clay away instead of just laying it down. So I just caught myself doing that. I'm glad you asked that. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, and also, but you're not like pushing, you're just kind of letting like the force of
Yeah,
the
I'm
spinning.
not pushing, I'm
going.
cutting. See, these are supposed to be a little sharp. And so it's, if you come in at an angle, I have to remind myself to lift it up at an angle, then it's carving it away. The other important thing here now is to determine how wide I want my foot. If it's a mixing bowl, you want stability in the kitchen. You know, you're mixing and you're tossing it around and you don't want the thing like, you know, jabbering back and forth on a really tiny foot. But if I was making a really graceful little porcelain bowl for the coffee table or the mantle, maybe I could have a graceful little foot, right? Something like this would probably be a big serving bowl of salad or something for company. And so I need some kind of stability, but when you look at the side, you know, once again we have that compromise between looking too clunky and wide at the bottom versus graceful, but is it so graceful then it's not functional? It has to be functional. This is a big bowl. You can't have it sitting on a tiny, tiny foot. Yeah, it's about there. All right, so now I want to carve out that inner ring. So hold that little loop tool. Which one is this? This is the R1 that I've been using. I haven't even gone to the R2 yet. Get close. Elbows in your sides. Look at my elbows. Put that circle, or that tool in the middle of the circle. And then the width of the foot here, how wide do you want that foot to be? Then also, oh, if I remember, this was really seemed thin. Oh, okay, I don't see any movement, pressing harder, harder, harder. Okay. If you're not careful, your trimming tool will cut right across this foot. Now you want to make this inner circle deep enough so that you can glaze it. Now we're going to start glazing after spring break, so you're really going to have to manage your time efficiently, because we're going to be throwing, we're going to be glazing, we're going to be stacking kilns. You know, if it's your turn to mix clay, we're going to learn how to mix glaze next week. So there's going to, a lot of the class time is going to be spent mixing clays, glazes, stacking kilns, glazing itself. So you're really going to have to manage your time wisely after spring break. The semester is just, kiss it goodbye after spring break. It's just gone. Again, if I had a mirror, I could be looking in the mirror for this, but if you put a straight edge across here, you want a good distance here that will allow you to get some glaze here. Give it a little push again. Then you can tap it too. Start to hear it sound more like a taut drum. Now what if you see movement on one side and it's not moving on the other side? What's that mean?
Off-center.
Off center.
Now, after we're done with this, do you want us to take like a sponge and like make it like soft again against
Yes,
it?
you mean get rid of these trimming rings?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll show you how to do that really soon. Yeah, see, all the carving brings the grog to the surface, and then you have sort of these trimming marks, just like you have throwing marks on the inside. And you want to get rid of that. Do you have a rubber rib?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thought we did, but, okay, so, just wondering why I'm not seeing any movement yet. I hate it when you, like, you know, if you take it off and you still feel some real heaviness, you can always, you're gonna love this, recenter it again and trim some more off. So I'm trying to avoid not having to take more off. Of course, I don't want to trim through the hole. Oh, what's this? Oh, nice. This is why you don't want to pick up anything off the floor. Piece of wood. So you want to make sure that you get enough carved away without carving through it. Questions? Did anybody want to mix clay by any chance? Don't all volunteer at once. Okay, well, probably run out of clay over the weekend. Then you'll be dipping into the new barrels, and then you're gonna be working with really fresh clay, but, and if you're going away for spring break, you know, not just in this class, but all your classes, plan your time wisely. Then if you see something's due after spring break, get on it. Okay, I saw a little bit of movement there. Okay, so how do we get rid of those nasty throwing marks? You can run a little film of water and run your rubber rib up the side. Same on this inner ring. And do this a few times, and you'll lay that grog down, put it back to sleep, and make it all nice and smooth. So you sign your piece in this inner circle. Okay. Now something this big, I'm gonna leave it upside down for a while. If I got it too thin, just flipping it right side up, I could squish it a little bit, you know? So I'm gonna let it rest upside down a little bit, and then I'll flip it. So then Megan asked, was it Megan or Karen asked about the shadow line?
Oh, that was me.
It was me, Karen. Okay. You can sort of do it upside down. Now it's a little wet, but sometimes upside down I put a bat on it and I roll the bat on the foot and see how you create a shadow line. You have to get down at eye level. Or when you do flip it right side up, you roll it and you bevel that foot a little bit to create a shadow line. Always dry them on the shelf on one sheet of paper towel like this. Go through the whole process. Ooh, this needs a line. Wonder where my line is on the inside. Like right here. Looks a little bare, doesn't it? So, with this one, trimmed it, put it right side up, and then I took my no, not that. And carved out these little chevron things. So we don't have time for the PowerPoint today, but we can look at the PowerPoint Tuesday. We have a lot to do next week. We may not have throwing time. We have to